Hi, everybody. So this month we've been connecting with the character and the spirit of Miriam. And we spoke at our main gathering about her unique ability to stand in this patient faith and expectation of Hashem's salvation. And we talked about her unique kind of loyalty to what she knows Hashem conveyed to her, even as a young girl. And she had this ability to hold on to that over decades and decades of devastation, and to come out with her tambourine at the sea, ready to sing thanks to Hashem even 80 years later. But what made Miriam Miriam? Like, what formative events happened to her to make her into who she became? So I wanted to do like an additional dive into Miriam, like one more aspect about her. Now there's a midrash in the oral tradition, a story passed down from generation to generation that I think sheds some light on Miriam's character in her childhood, but I was hesitant to discuss it in our main class because it's not definitively identified with Miriam. It identifies her possibly. And on the other hand, though, I don't know if it really matters, because this story might be about Miriam, and the collective Jewish memory, if you ask any little child about this story, they would identify it with Miriam, like in the popular kind of memory. So even if it isn't Miriam and it's a different heroine, it's worth studying either way. So however we cut it up, I think it's a valuable study. So let's buckle up. Now this month is the month of Nisan, the month of the Exodus. And while we were discussing the heroism of Miriam at the Nile, watching her brave baby brother, and then later on leading the women in praise at the Song of the Sea, there is this feminine heroism that comes even before these stories. So as everyone knows, in Exodus chapter 1, we're told that in verse 15 that the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives. One was named Shiphrah and the second was named Puah. And he said, when you deliver the Hebrew women, when you go to their houses to deliver the babies, and you see on the birth stool, if it was a son, you should put him to death. But if it is a daughter, she may live. So Pharaoh gives his first genocidal decree just to the midwives. He's kind of keeping his genocide under wraps, not making a big declaration, and he's trying to kind of sneak it under the radar through these midwives. And then it says in verse 17, the midwives, however, feared God, so they did not do as the king of Egypt had spoken to them, and they enabled the boys to live. Now this is after ongoing enslavement. And when we think about it, the first rebellion against Pharaoh was not led by Moses and Aaron. The first rebellion was led by these Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, who directly disobeyed the genocidal orders. And throughout the sort of ancient Jewish writings, everyone argues about who Shiphrah and Puah were, because their courage is so remarkable. And in the midrash called Shmot Rabbah, it says, who were the midwives? So there's one opinion of Rav. Rav says a daughter-in-law and her mother-in-law, Yocheved, and Elisheva, the daughter of Aminadab. So the midwives are identified possibly as being Yocheved, Moshe's mother, and her daughter-in-law, Elisheva. But Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman said a mother and her daughter, Yocheved and Miriam. So the midrash identifies these midwives as possibly being Yocheved and Miriam herself. And the midrash asks, but was Miriam not only 5 years old? Because we know that Aaron was older than Moses by 3 years, and Miriam was even older than Aaron. Our rabbi said Miriam would go with her mother and assist her in the work of midwifery. She was energetic and quick, and even when the child was small, she already knew how to speak. Why were they called Shiphrah and Puah? Shiphrah, because through her, Israel multiplied and increased. The Hebrew word Shiphrah is becoming better. And Puah, because she would revive the baby when they said it had died. If we're looking at what made Miriam Miriam, we have this ancient tradition tying Miriam and her mother to being those Hebrew midwives. I was so moved many years ago by this midrash that my daughter, Emunah, who's now 12 years old, is actually named Emunah Yocheved, because during her pregnancy, I was diagnosed with a very serious illness that endangered the baby, and the doctor said I really need to terminate the pregnancy, but I just couldn't do it, and it was very early on, and I even, from a Jewish law perspective, had permission to terminate the pregnancy. Judaism and Christianity differ on this, especially when there's serious danger, and it's the very beginning of the pregnancy. But I couldn't do it personally. I couldn't do it. I just felt like this pregnancy was a gift from Hashem, and I couldn't turn it over. I wasn't able to do it. And thankfully she was born to be this incredible baby who's now becoming an amazing young woman, thank God. And I named her Emunah, which means faith, because I just had to hold on to that faith in that pregnancy. And her middle name is Yocheved because of this midrash that ties Yocheved to being one of the midwives. It was also the name of my late aunt of blessed memory, and I thought it was very fitting for her because she never gave up on these babies. And so the midrash is trying to explain their names, and the midrash says that Miriam was named Pua. Listen to the name. It's like actually based on the phonetics of the name. If you listen to the name, like Pua, Poo, she would revive the babies, like resuscitate them, like breathing into them, Pua. And there's something, about what she was doing. She would just sort of Pua into these, like try to breathe life back into these lifeless babies. And she never gave up. And what's amazing is that even when babies were growing up into slavery, even when they were threatened with death, she would not give up on any baby, even when everything seemed lost. So if we're wondering what formed Miriam, maybe this midrash sheds some light, because her formative experience was practicing not giving up hope, even when other people thought that all was lost. She practiced that characteristic, that spiritual exercise of understanding that every life is valuable. Every life comes from Hashem. You can imagine that not every time was successful for her, but if even one baby was saved, she was just practicing that spirit of not giving up. And so then she was prepared when her brother Moshe was born. Everyone else turned away. They gave up. She didn't mind standing on her own and being the only one who didn't give hope. She didn't mind looking at the Nile to see what was coming, because she was used to everyone giving up and her not giving up. And I think that's really just a beautiful aspect that can be learned from Miriam and the Hebrew midwives. Now, why was it important for me to share this with you today? So just as Miriam waited 80 solid years between her understanding from Hashem that there was going to be this salvation and the actual salvation, 80 years precisely have passed now since 1945, since the gates of hell closed and the Holocaust came to the end in September 1945. We're 80 years now in this Holocaust Remembrance Day out of the Holocaust. So I thought it would be a unique time for our group in connecting with the memory of the Holocaust to try to find that spirit of Miriam in the memory of that and of that tragedy. So while I was studying Miriam, it was actually quite incredible, and I was meditating on her character, I discovered an incredible testimony from the Holocaust, which unbelievably seemed to really bring a modern day version of precisely the spirit of Miriam and the midwives of Egypt. So I want to, it's hard to, how can you remember 6 million people? How can you remember like something so enormous as the Holocaust? So I want to just focus on one person. Stanislava Leszczyńska lived in Poland, and she was a midwife. She worked in an area of Poland with many Jewish families, and so she ended up learning actually how to speak Yiddish because she had so many Jewish patients. When the war broke out, because she was so connected with the Jewish community, she and her children were helping sneak food into the Jewish ghetto, and they got caught. Her sons were sent to labor camps, and she and her daughter, who's actually a medical student, were sent together to Auschwitz. Her husband ended up escaping, but was able to, but ended up being killed in the Warsaw Uprising. Like he fought with the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, even though he wasn't Jewish either. So Stanislava and her daughter, they were sent to the women's camp, and Dr. Mengele, who was like curious to see how starved and tortured women would fare in childbirth, he sent Stanislava and her daughter to be midwives in the infirmary in Auschwitz to do this like twisted research and to deliver the babies. And years later, after the Holocaust, she described what her life was like there. She put her life at risk every day to save newborns and mothers. She wrote a report called A Report of a Midwife from Auschwitz, and she gave this unbelievable testimony of her and her daughter. They were the only midwives in Auschwitz, and she estimates that she delivered 3,000 babies, and she describes the impossibility of her work there for 2 years. That's something like 5 births a day, and she had no one to really switch her. She worked herself to exhaustion with worms and rats and disease everywhere, no equipment. But she said that the most incredible thing was that, it's actually an unbelievable thing to read, was that not one baby or mother under her care ever died during childbirth. Every single baby was alive and wanted to live. Think about people in those states of starvation. And out of those 3,000 babies, she says that 2,500 approximately were killed right away. Some not Jewish babies were sent to be adopted by German families, but almost all of the babies were killed. But somehow, unbelievably, 30 out of 3,000 babies were able to survive and be hidden somehow with their mothers in Auschwitz. And do you know how she says that the Nazis killed the babies? She wrote a report, and it says, until May 1943, the children born at the camp were cruelly murdered. They were drowned in a keg. After each birth, the mothers could hear gurgling and splashes of water. She then got the commandment from Mengele to treat the newborns as dead. And she said she was a short woman in stature, but she could stand up to the doctor. And she replied, no, children must not be killed. And she delivered these babies, not one stillborn. Not one mother died in childbirth. Even the best hospital in the world at that time could not boast of such an unbelievable statistic. And I was so horrified and stricken when I read that, because there were so many ways that the Nazis could think of killing babies. They had bullets, they had gas chambers, they were all about efficiency. But she said that the babies, specifically the babies, the Nazis wanted to have drowned one by hand. What would possess them to do that? Is that not an inexplicable behavior? If you don't believe that that is the spirit of Pharaoh itself, is that not the spirit? Is Stanislava's spirit not the spirit of the Hebrew midwives who told Pharaoh, listen, these Hebrew women give birth so quickly and so healthily, they don't even need our help. Their babies are born alive and healthy, even in Auschwitz. There are so many Jewish sources that say that the story of Egypt and our slavery in Egypt is not just a story that happened. It's the archetypal story of exile and redemption themselves. And every time we go through exile and redemption, the oral tradition teaches us that there will be the embodiment of the spirit of what we went through in Egypt. And it's just incredible to see, they surely weren't intending to do that, but it's like when the evil spirit comes into the world, it manifests in a certain way that repeats itself, but also the spirit of the redeemers and the heroes manifest in a certain way. The spirit of the first Holocaust perpetrators in Egypt was somehow unconsciously channeled into the last Holocaust perpetrators, but it was also the spirit of the heroes and the heroines that rebelled against that expressed itself in our modern times. Think about it. What would possess somebody like Stanislava to give up rest, to give up minimal comfort, safety, to deliver babies all day long that she knew would ultimately be killed? Is that not the reincarnation of the spirit of the Hebrew midwives, perhaps of Miriam herself? A mother and a daughter, you can't make this up. Just like Miriam knew that most of the babies were doomed, but somehow she was able to save some. They lived because of her. In the face of this darkness and doom, she understood that every child is precious. Every life is precious. Every life has meaning, even if only a few breaths. She could give them love and care. She could serve them. She could give them dignity. She found a way to maintain dignity, and even if it was just for a few moments, for as long as she could. Stanislava, she ultimately ended up, and her daughter survived the Holocaust. And in January 1970, just a few years before she died, there was actually a celebration of her heroism in Warsaw. And she got to meet the women prisoners from Auschwitz and their children, those few that had been born in the camp and survived. Can you imagine that experience, 35, 40 years later? And so whether or not this midrash is, identifying the midwives of Miriam, or these are just other heroines, although I do think it was Miriam, it enriches our understanding of Miriam because she faced, or the midwives, because they faced what seemed like sure doom and gave up on no one. And Miriam in the Midrash has this ability to just keep resuscitating these and not giving up hope when everything feels lost. And that spirit is embodied when she stands over Moshe. She won't give up when everyone else gave up. So it's like this spirit that seems to characterize the great women in all generations, sort of from like Miriam and the midwives through history, through the Holocaust. And it brings us back to our fundamental question, because the women, the heroines of the Bible, they don't get instructions or promises the way that men do. So how do these heroines find strength to act in ways that the male heroes, needed promises and guarantees for? I think it goes to really the core of being a woman. While men tend to be perhaps more outcome oriented, the fundamental job of a woman as a mother, as a caretaker, is not to look at outcomes, but to look at each day, how am I going to do the best that I can for this child, completely unrelated to the outcome. When someone gets pregnant, a woman doesn't know if her child is going to be healthy, if he's going to be smart. They don't know anything. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about biological children or children that we're caring for, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, students, patients. That spirit of Miriam can live inside every woman to recognize that we're being called to hold on to the holiness that is in each person under our care, to love unconditionally, not because Hashem promised us that anything will turn out the way we want it to, but because we find inside of ourselves faith in the value and the preciousness of every soul that Hashem sends into the world, to recognize that every breath on this planet has meaning, and to see that, to cherish it, to hold on to it no matter what happens. So at this time when we're remembering the Holocaust, it's such a big thing. How do you remember 6 million people? But there's this story that, for me, connects with this season of studying Miriam. And in connecting with her, I think it's just a good time to connect with that aspect of courage that expresses itself throughout different times in history, throughout difficult situations, and to draw inspiration from her in our own lives. So with that, I want to wish all of you a meaningful Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I just hope that through the tears and through remembering the horrors and the tragedies, just like we draw strength from Miriam, we can draw strength from courageous women who embody the spirit of Miriam, and can inspire us in our day-to-day lives to hold on to those characteristics that Miriam represents and embodies. So bye everybody. Look forward to seeing you all at our next meeting.